Moving to college is a scary, tumultuous step in life. It's the first major step we make as adults. Some of us move away from home, go off to college in a new city, new state, or even a new country. Some of us choose to commute and continue to live in the home we grew up in. No matter what choice we make, it is still a huge shift in our lives, which alters how we view home. Coming up in this episode of the podcast, A Glimpse into Adulthood, we will hear from 4 first-year college students on their journey up to this point and how their experiences have altered the way they view home. First, we will hear from Teck.
Transitioning into adulthood is hard and often brings feelings of homesickness as we are far away from what is familiar. The longer we are away, the more appreciative we are of being able to call a place such a special name, home. Being in our comfort zone brings back the reminiscent feeling of being a child, oblivious to the outside world. However, home can be defined in many ways, and oftentimes it isn't a place, but instead the people that make you feel like home. My name is Teck, and I am a first-year UCI student. Moving to college was a big step in adulthood for me. Living in the same house for my whole life, I grew attached to the familiar surroundings and became accustomed to having a bunch of people around. My house has always been compared to a market because of how loud and crowded it is constantly. But that was what defined my home. A comfortable place where the thought of it would bring a warmth to my heart instantly. What really defines my home are my family and friends. It takes a lot of time for me to confide in someone. I know that it is home when I am able to feel comfortable and completely myself without doubt or judgment. It is that feeling when you don't have to say anything, but they will still fully understand you. Everything just feels natural and I get this sense of belonging. In high school, I would always imagine what my life would be like in college. One of the main things I looked forward to was meeting new people and forming long-term friendships along the way. But those were unrealistic expectations set because it was much more difficult than I presumed. As I moved away from home to an unfamiliar place, I started learning more about myself, things I never paid much attention to before, like how fast my social battery drains and the homebody I am at the end of the day. It makes meeting people outside of class difficult despite living on campus. I had made a best friend very early on in elementary school, and thinking back to it, those times were one of my most prized memories regarding friendships. We were so young, naive, and in our own world. It was the kind of friendship I always dreamed of, the ones where you feel this instant click with. But this euphoric feeling did not last very long because one day she told me she had to move to a different school. I took such a long time to fully process that I would be losing a valuable friend forever. We were oblivious to the reality that the chances of keeping in contact were low. The parting was so regretful because I felt like I didn't have the chance to fully appreciate it wholeheartedly since I became so used to it. It wasn't until she left that these emotions grew more prominent. Being in the moment made it harder for me to take a step back and realize how special of a connection we had and how it ended so abruptly. She will always remain the first childhood friend that I truly felt at home with. Growing up in a Hispanic-dominated community meant I got many opportunities to learn more about a culture that was different from my own. Unexpectedly, I felt lost because of the cultural and language barriers I faced. There were many times where my friends would speak in Spanish when we sat together for lunch. This led to me always feeling left out because I couldn't help but wonder what they were talking about. Throughout the friendship, we also had many disagreements, and that made me become more self-aware when talking to friends. As a result, my self-esteem took a huge toll and I no longer felt that comfort I once had. I even dared to wonder at times what would have happened if I was more like them. Would I have been more accepted? Was it my personality that made me feel so isolated? This led to a huge change in my identity and outlook on friendships. Middle school was such a pivotal moment for me because I would start anew in a different school away from my elementary school friends. Going through middle school, I constantly felt like I had to hide my true self. I was known as a shy and quiet girl, someone I wasn't back in elementary school. I constantly held myself back in fear that things would take a turn for the worse. I often overthought a lot of hypothetical situations to make sure I did not make mistakes. I joined many clubs and sports to keep a lingering sense of my identity, but I always wondered if I was being too cautious and whether or not it was affecting my social life. Those 2 years felt like a blur to me as high school quickly approached. Still redefining my school life, I felt a constant void in the beginning of my high school experience. Every day felt the same as I forced myself into a bubble and did not have the guts to venture out. I definitely took that time for granted because instead of working towards building my confidence, I shied away from a lot of opportunities. I hopped between two friend groups hoping I could maintain both, but it was draining and ironically made it harder to build tight-knit connections like the other girls had with each other. I missed my sophomore year because of the pandemic, and that year was definitely the most isolating. I barely contacted anyone. I was so out of touch from interacting with others that it became a new experience for me when returning to in-person school. When junior year came around, I felt like a complete outsider. I continued to try to balance two different friend groups, but my friends were always in a different class or in a club together that I wasn't interested in, and that made the distance between us grow. As I became more aware of the space I created, I realized that I needed to make some sacrifices. I did not feel content with the place I was at and strived for more. Yes, there were many decisions to make and many barriers to endure, but once I went through with it, I finally felt that familiar feeling of home, but in school life. To this day, I still keep in touch with my friends and put effort into maintaining those friendships. Despite not feeling at home through the majority of these occasions, with time came redefining home. I spent most of my time at school, and that's what pushed me to put effort into shaping the meaning of home and how I can also find that in other people. Finding home also comes with searching for a sense of belonging, and that is a key factor in friendships. Once I found my long-term friends, it filled the void that I had and solidified what home meant for me. But finding this recently made it really hard when I had to move away to college. From my history of friendships, it's not too far-fetched to say it takes time for me to build trust and comfort with others. I struggle to this day overcoming this mindset, especially now that I am in college, because if high school was already hard, college is even more challenging to find connections that will last a lifetime. Every time I go to class, I usually head back to my dorm as soon as I can. On my way there, I see people laughing and joking so effortlessly. It definitely is a reality check because I look at my college experience so far and see no changes being made to my day-to-day life. I get major deja vu as it reminds me of what happened in the past and how I should get out of that cycle, but it is harder to do than say. I occasionally get this feeling of regret because while others are making the best out of the time they have, I return back to what feels familiar to me. I am afraid that I will look back at my college years and think about the times when I refused to go somewhere or do something when it could have been a life-changing experience. When I call back home, I see all the things I have been missing out on, and that only makes me feel more nostalgic. But deep down, I know that part of growing up is adapting to situations that may be uncomfortable at first. Home will never change locations for me, but I can redefine parts of it with the people I surround myself with. I try to search for the kind of feeling I get when looking at the familiar streets by my house and immediately thinking, this feels right. Or when I eat a home-cooked meal and feel comforted after being away for so long. It's the idea that even though we are apart for a while, returning back feels like we have never left.
Just like Katie, Jasmine's story has to do with how she considered one of her family members to be her home as well. Life goes on, but things begin to change. As her loved one develops an unexpected condition, the dynamic of their relationship changes, which in turn causes her mindset to shift. She takes this experience as an opportunity to learn and apply these lessons to her first year in college, as she is now maturing into an adult. She has learned how to appreciate life, advising that we look on the bright side of things and not to take anything for granted because we are lucky to live the life we have.
Hello everyone, my name is Jasmine Carlos. Regarding our podcast's main theme about redefining home, home isn't just a physical place where I eat, sleep, and live. Growing up in a Filipino household, we were always very family-oriented. For me, I considered my home to be a person who made me feel safe and comforted. Home was someone who had shown me unconditional love and someone who made me feel like I was home, even when I wasn't. And who might this person be, you may ask? Well, when I think about my definition of home, I think about my grandma. When I was in elementary school, my grandma would take me to eat Chinese dim sum almost every Sunday. It was our routine, always ordering the chicken feet and the pork siomai because it was her favorite. I was her favorite. Having our weekly lunch dates and spending quality time with her was like my childhood home. After several months of doing this, one Sunday in the car she asked, "Jas, which way is the way that we go for dim sum again?" This question startled me because she always knew how to drive there without directions. About a year later, I'd find out that my grandma would be diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. My parents tried to explain it to me, but since I was still pretty young, I couldn't understand how someone's brain could start deteriorating. This progressive disease took over her body way too fast for me to process. By the end of 2014, she forgot how to walk, she forgot how to talk, she forgot how to eat, she forgot who she was, and she forgot who I was. No more driving to weekly dim sum, no more routine. My home had changed. It felt like I was living with a stranger. I couldn't recognize this fragile, soulless body who could not function without the help of someone spoon-feeding her or changing her. I had to adapt to a new way of living with this person, who once was someone I looked up to for support. Helping take care of my grandma allowed me to mature at a young age. But I had lost these feelings of safety and comfort from her that I held on to so dearly. This period of my life felt very confusing and frustrating. Why'd this have to happen to her? Why'd this have to happen to me? Why did this stupid disease have to ruin our relationship together? I had turned to resent who she had become because I missed the nurturing grandparent she once was, but there was nothing we could do to get her back. There aren't any medications yet, and no one has found a cure still to this day. The years go by, and it's now 2019. I start distancing myself from this person who I couldn't talk to anymore. It felt like I was drifting further and further away from home. To prevent my negative mindset from going on for too long, my parents had to convince me that it was nobody's fault for what was happening to my grandma. There are studies proving that a factor of Alzheimer's disease is genetics, so it may have been passed down to her from her parents. My parents reminded me about all the ways she has sacrificed so much for this family by immigrating to America. She is the reason why I was born into this country filled with opportunity. Taking me out every Sunday was just a way for us to celebrate our blessings and enjoy everything she has worked for. My grandma might have been the reason why I was so chubby as a kid. It was because she loved me so much to always feed me and make sure I was full. These realizations made me feel guilty for having all those negative thoughts. At that point, I was just grateful that she was still alive. Unfortunately, on January 23, 2022, my grandma had passed away, just 10 days before her 80th birthday. I regret not being there for her throughout her full journey. As I look back on that experience, I take the lessons I have learned and apply them to how I live my life as an incoming college student now. Living with my grandma at the peak of her Alzheimer's was like living with someone who I didn't know. Now, in my first year here at UC Irvine, I had to adapt to sharing a room with 3 new roommates. It was a struggle at first, after only being used to having a room to myself. Around week 3 or 4, for the first round of midterms, I started having a hard time, and I resented the fact that I was in such a competitive college. It was hard to become adjusted to this fast-paced environment. I found it stressful to balance my classes, have a social life, and on top of that, find time for myself. College felt very different compared to high school, with a greater workload and much harder tests and assignments. I did not like it here. Although college may be difficult, I had to remember that being here was a new chapter of my life that I should not take for granted. I am very blessed to be enrolled in this school, and I have an education in which most people do not get the chance to have or afford. I realize that living on this beautiful campus, 365 miles away from my parents, has allowed me to mature into an adult by being responsible for my own actions. Whether it's doing my own laundry or going to bed at a certain time, picking what food I eat, or basically anything I do, all of these choices are up for me to decide, which I am lucky enough to have this type of independence. Moving to UCI has definitely changed my definition of home. Now, it's more like I have to support myself and remind myself about what the right things to do and think are. Once I had this mindset, college was becoming enjoyable. I made more friends, started to bond more with my roommates, and I even got better grades in my classes. This place started to feel like home. All I had to do was have gratitude.
As we transition into the next segment, the same recurring theme that the people around us make a home can be seen. In Khwe's story, however, he feels estranged from the new college environment and seeks to find a home even as he's living at home. But he also comes to realize that his family is still the most important and that it takes time to build a new home. Meanwhile, we shouldn't forget that what we already have, our family, who will never fail to support us wherever we go.
Hey, my name is BaoKhoi Nguyen. Everyone calls me Khue though, because no one could ever pronounce my real name. I don't really get why though, because I think it's pretty easy to sound out. It's not easy meeting new people out in the world, and having a name others struggled to figure out made it so much harder. I remember back in grade school, whenever there would be a sub in class, I would always hate roll call because I would have to correct them, or they would ask me to say my name. It was always funny to hear people's attempts though, because some of them were really creative and absolutely hilarious. But it gets boring when people struggle every time. Like, eventually I got used to it. People who see me every day or my teachers would all eventually learn and it would be fine. It wasn't like I was meeting new people every day, so it wasn't really a big problem. That was in the past though, now I'm in college, it's different. Walking into college is something a lot of us look forward to, and a new environment with new friends and things like that. We were all bored of our tiny high school with people we've known for 12 years or something like that. And I was the same. That first typical college student that was so done with everyone back in our little cities. I remember the first time I really experienced UCI was during our SPOP orientation back in July or August for some others. I felt like everyone was looking for the same answers, like what does college look like, or what does dorm life feel like? During SPOP, we get that one night where we stay in the dorms, meet some new friends, and do college stuff. Like, everyone seems to find those dorms so fascinating, like it was something novel, like it's the college experience. Those 2 days pretty much answered everyone's questions. We saw the lecture halls, we got tours, we planned out our schedules, we experienced a stress-free college experience for 2 days. It was honestly a great experience. I loved the campus, it was huge and pretty. It's pretty hard to get lost because I could just keep walking and eventually I'd make it to where I wanted to go because it's a huge circle. I was different though. When everyone talked about moving into the dorms with their friends, I already knew I was staying at home. I still love my decision, by the way, don't get me wrong. The couple hours I actually spent in the dorms during that one night at SPOT was already enough for me. I couldn't imagine living in a room that small with a bunch of other college students. It just wasn't my thing. Plus, as a commuter, I have a car and I can go anywhere I want, so it's technically a positive thing, but it made me different from everyone else. The older students told me that they met some of their closest friends at SPOP and had a really great time and whatnot, but I didn't find many people of similar interest to me. There was pretty much no one in my major, and it was hard for me to really make good connections with anyone. I began to wonder if I would be able to find my circle. I've heard it was hard as a commuter, and I was starting to really believe that. Oh, and it was pretty rough with my hard-to-pronounce name. I'm meeting new people all around, and I was always say, "Hi, my name is Khue." And they'd be like, Cole? And I would be like, no, koi, like the fish, like the koi fish. And everyone would laugh and finally get it. Like, it's funny because my friends back in the day would joke around with me and say koi fish and things like that, and we'd laugh about it. But I never knew I would end up using it to introduce myself one day. Anyway, it kind of became a habit. Whenever someone can't really get my name right, I would pull out that joke and it'd be pretty easy. Then the first day of school came around and I began to attend my classes. I remember walking into the huge 400-person lecture hall, feeling confident, hoping I would sit down next to someone I could talk to. Everyone was in my major and I was having some high hopes, but everyone came with a group of friends, probably their dorm mates or friends they knew from before. So I ended up sitting alone on that first day. I thought to myself, oh well, I'll find people eventually, right? Well, the next day I came into lecture, I would sit myself down at another random place and, well, I ended up not talking to anybody. Then I'd go to my next big lecture and guess what? I talked to no one. Eventually class got pretty boring. Like, I like bio and all, and that's why I picked it as my major, but a couple of weeks in, things started getting really repetitive and it was pretty much a routine every day. And obviously, as a college student, I didn't get much sleep. It's like the college student syndrome where we always have homework or midterms coming. Or somehow, even if we don't have any homework or exams coming up, we still end up getting like no sleep. It's rough out here. So obviously, when I combine no sleep with a boring lecture, you can probably guess what happens. I end up falling asleep in class. That happens to me in high school too. Like, I was getting no sleep and I would nod off in class pretty often. It was hilarious back then, though, because I would almost fall out of my seat, inching towards the edge of my desk with every nod. And then right when I would fall off, I would always wake up and pull myself back up. And all of my friends would be entertained watching me almost fall off my chair through a boring math lecture or audiobook recording in English. I don't know if my teachers noticed, but if they did, they never said anything, and it was always something really funny. So going back to my college lectures, I would also be falling asleep and nodding off in class, but there was no one to watch. Like, no one cared. The professor obviously wouldn't notice because it was a huge lecture hall and it felt really distant. Things that felt like they mattered to people around me didn't matter anymore. And it's hard to find a new place and in this new segment of life. When I really think about it, going to college is really like finding a new home. There's a lot of ways we can interpret home, but in my case, I could consider home a place where I'm comfortable around people I enjoy being around. And I guess it felt easy when I pretty much knew everyone before going to college. But now everything's new. I need to find a new group of people, a new way of life, kind of. It's funny to think that I'm actually still at home, yet I feel like I'm far away from home. I'm distant from people around me. It's harder for me to feel like I'm a part of something. It's okay though. I'm slowly getting more involved in different things, clubs and stuff, and I'm meeting more people through my smaller classes and discussions. I've also really learned how important my family is to me. Even though it might seem hard for me to sit in class alone, it really makes me appreciate the fact that I'm in fact still living at home. I get to see my parents and my sister every day, and I realize that they're the ones who will stay with me forever. And I think it's okay that I haven't met people yet. I know I will eventually. It'll just take time. That's how life works, doesn't it? Well, I hope you enjoyed my story, and if you forgot my name, just think of a fish in a pond.
We just heard from Khue on his experiences being close to home but also very distant when it comes to going to college. Now we move on to my story of someone who grapples with identity and cultural shifts while struggling to define home, while she's both at home and far from home at the same time. Hi. I think you guys noticed that I've been hosting this entire thing, but now it's time to get to know me. My name is Tran, a first-year international student at UC Irvine. Before I start, I want you to think about the word home. One single word, just 4 letters, but it holds so much meaning. Try closing your eyes for a second. Try to envision what your home is. I think most people would envision the house they grew up in or their family members, but when I do it, all I see is pitch black. If someone were to ask 16-year-old me to define what home is to her, I don't think she could give them an answer no matter how hard she tried. I've always had a complicated relationship with what home is to me. I'm what most people call a third culture kid. This is a term that refers to children who grew up in a culture different from the one they were born into or the one their parents were raised in. I experienced this because my dad moved my family to Hawaii when I was 5, so he could pursue his PhD. I spent ages 5 to 10 there, where I experienced most of my important developmental childhood milestones. It was where I learned to read and write, lost my first tooth, rode a bike for the first time. Most of my fondest childhood memories reside there. But even as a kid, I never called Hawaii my home. One time, someone asked me, quote unquote, what was I? And my 8-year-old self, who really didn't know anything, confidently answered, a Vietnamese-born Hawaiian American. Mind you, that I'm not American nor ethnically Hawaiian. Even though I was living in Hawaii and it made up the bulk of my childhood memories, I was Vietnamese by birth and my parents called Vietnam their home. I felt compelled to not call one single place my home because then I would be disregarding another part of myself. When I moved back to Vietnam, the question became even harder to answer. At 10 years old, my dad's PhD ended, which forced us to go back. All of a sudden, I came to a place where I both fit in and didn't at the same time. Physically, I looked like everyone else, with my long black hair and my pale golden skin. But on the inside, I was drastically different. I couldn't speak, read, and write in the language I was supposed to know by birth, and I held a different mindset from the traditional old Vietnamese one that most of my peers were taught. I felt like I was being ripped away from everything I knew, and suddenly was a stranger in a place where I was supposed to belong. For years, I resented this place. The anger I held stopped me from ever considering calling Vietnam my home. I didn't even refer to it as the place I grew up, because saying so would imply I had a fond emotional connection to my surroundings. I was simply just lost and wanted more than anything to go back. When junior year came around, I had spent 6.5 years stuck between being lost, angry, and in denial when I finally got a wake-up call. On a random Thursday in the middle of November, my dad randomly asked, "Do you want to go to high school in the USA?" At that point, I had given up hope. I accepted that going away to college was the only way I could return, so I poured my heart and soul into preparing for college applications since I was 14. As it turned out, my dad's colleague had also just sent his daughter to the US to complete her last 2 years of high school. My immediate answer was yes. I was delighted, but I also tried to keep my hopes down, just in case it was another throwaway idea that my dad had and we weren't going to take it seriously. It wasn't until my mom took me to a high school/college consultant that I started to let myself hope again. We started setting up a plan to get everything ready so I could go in a month and a half, and the more we were prepared, the more my hopes went up. But also during this time, I was also going through a really difficult time emotionally and mentally. I had just lost my grandma a year prior, and I was still grieving her death. It had gotten to the point where my parents sent me to a psychiatrist who diagnosed me with PTSD, which had me seeing a therapist regularly. In one of the sessions where my mom was present, she brought up my plans to leave for boarding school in Illinois. The session was a difficult one for me as we talked through my decision. At the end, he recommended to my mom that I shouldn't go. He said, quote unquote, she views it as an escape, not an opportunity. That line is one that will stick with me forever because it was true, but my 16-year-old self refused to admit it. I wanted to leave so bad, but for all the wrong reasons. At that point, I had spent 6.5 years stuck between being in denial and being angry. I had spent years telling myself that this living situation was temporary. My family had applied for a green card when I was 2, so I was just waiting to go back. I didn't allow myself to grow attached to anyone because I thought I was leaving in a few years anyway, so what was the point? Not only did I deny Vietnam as my home, I stopped giving meaning to my experiences there as well. That night, when I went home, my parents sat me down and asked me why I really wanted to go, and I couldn't come up with a genuine answer. I could only list surface-level things, such as being able to take AP classes, and maybe two more things that were so important that I can't recall now. I was too ashamed to admit it was because I just wanted to leave. I knew deep down that it wasn't a real reason, at least not one a sane person could agree with. I couldn't see beyond the pain that had been building for 6.5 years, which was only exemplified by the loss of my grandma. My parents ultimately took back the opportunity to leave for high school, which devastated me. But looking back, it was a blessing in disguise. While I took a few days to grieve the lost opportunity to leave, I realized that I would be here for the next 1.5 years. I had the rest of my junior and senior year left in Vietnam. I couldn't keep letting myself live like this. I couldn't keep letting myself rot like I had been doing for so long, and I started putting myself out there more. I became more active in clubs I was in, starting putting more effort into my relationship with friends, and did things that I would never have done before. I even ran for prom queen. I was happier than I had been in years. I spent my entire life thinking I was far from home, but in reality, I was redefining what it was to me. For the longest time, I thought home was a place, a location on a map where I felt a deep sense of belonging. But what I've come to realize is that home isn't just a physical space. It's about connections, the memories, and the emotions tied to that place. And because I refused to connect with my surroundings, Vietnam never got the chance to become my home. My experience moving as a kid had a great impact on how I viewed adulthood, because honestly, I felt like an adult as early as the age of 15. The accumulation of the move, the resentment I felt, my grief, and many other things pushed me to mature more quickly because I wasn't allowing myself to be a kid. Because of this, and instead of going to the park with my friends, I spent my weekends searching what colleges were. Instead of going to birthday parties, I spent nights taking English proficiency tests and SAT prep courses. I probably spent more time researching what dual enrollment classes, AP credits, and college rankings were than texting my friends. So when I got to college, the change wasn't hard for me. I didn't experience the culture shock that people warned international students about. I didn't even cry when my parents hugged me goodbye before I boarded the plane for 7,265 miles away. I spent so much time looking forward to the next thing to happen that I took major moments in my life for granted. Now, I'm nearly 30 months into living in my college dorm at UCI. I finally did it. I finally left. But as I look back at the last 8 years of my life, I can barely recall over half of it. I don't want that to happen to my years at college. I don't want to look back one day and all I see is myself looking forward to the next step in my life, like I've been doing for so long. I realized I could never define it, because home to me was anywhere but here. Like most people, I spent my entire life chasing or searching for a place to call home. But actually, I think I spent my life chasing the feeling of home. In Hawaii, it was the feeling of fully belonging and fitting in. In Vietnam, it was the longing for familiarity when everything around me was changing. For most of us in college, whether or not we have moved far away from home, the feeling we are chasing is success. I want the next 4 years to be fruitful, especially for our future. Despite college being a major goal to us as teens, once we get to college, we begin to look at our time here as a stepping stone into the future, especially when things start to become stressful. But I've learned that it's crucial to not let the pursuit of tomorrow overshadow the present. It's not just about reaching the next milestone. It's about embracing the journey, savoring each step, and finding solace and joy in the present, wherever that may be. This is one lesson I will keep with me, and I wish my 11-year-old self knew, and I hope you take it with you too.